Hello everyone, welcome to another video on the channel. Welcome to a video where I'm going to give you 6 tips on how to boost your driver rating in sport mode. And in not one of these tips am I going to tell you to start driving faster or how to drive faster. More, we're going to take a look at this kind of smaller details, maybe the things you've overlooked or haven't really thought about, but these kind of little things can be so important. Sometimes the difference between a 5th place and an 8th place is just the small little margins. And yeah, if you follow some of these tips, it should improve the consistency of your results, and it's really consistent, decent results rather than kind of peaks and troughs that are going to improve your driver rating. Now, I do think you'll probably get more benefit from this video if you're maybe like a B driver trying to get up to A, or like a C driver trying to get to B, but that doesn't mean that if you're an A plus driver, you may well not kind of be able to gain some advantage from watching this video. Maybe some of the things here will be enough to get you from being a low A plus driver up to a mid A plus driver, or maybe even a mid A plus driver up to a high A plus driver, because most of the things I'm going to point out here, I still see very fast, high rated drivers making these mistakes. So moving on to tip number 1, and that is going to be how to minimise your time loss when you are being overtaken. Now you will maybe thinking, Wombo, I don't want to be overtaken. Well, you're not alone. Nobody driving a racing game or racing sim in the real world racing wants to get overtaken, but it's just a fact of racing that sometimes you will end up with a faster driver behind you who's going to go in for that overtake. For example, at Bathurst here, I have ended up with a World Tour driver behind me coming down the Conrod straight towards the chase. Now, I kind of held him off for a couple of laps, but I realised the game is up, and I realised if I fight them too hard, I'm maybe going to potentially lose even more positions. So coming down into the chase here, I literally brake around about 10 metres early. Now the reason for that is it just lets the other driver go up the inside. They hit their sort of braking mark at the kind of normal point, and by me braking a little bit early, it means they sort of shoot a car length ahead of me, which means when it comes into the turning in phase of the corner, I can kind of turn in normally and minimise my time loss. If I kind of brake normally into the corner, they kind of get an awkward moment where both of the drivers go side by side through the corner. It costs me a whole lot more time than doing it the other way. It also makes the life more difficult for the other driver, and yeah, you just see the delta going up and the time loss kind of getting tripled than what it really had to be. Another similar situation here. The situation in this one wasn't that the driver behind me was faster, but I knew they were on a much faster tyre compound. I was on hard tyres, they were on soft tyres. It's early on in the race, it's lap 3 of an 18 lap race. There's no point in me fighting that down into the tight right hander. So just brake a little bit early, let their car get a full car length ahead of mine, and then I can turn into the corner normally and just lose a couple of attempts in the process. If we look at a very similar overtake between these two drivers, they kind of try to do the same thing, but the Subaru gets it a little bit wrong, goes into the turn-in point, clips the back of the Genesis and then drops behind. You can see they probably lost about 7 attempts there compared to maybe a couple of attempts in my scenario. And just another one here, we've got Arkeys coming up to turn 1 at Watkins Glen. He sees this Lamborghini coming up behind him, he brakes a little bit early to let the Lamborghini come in. He can turn into the corner normally, and because the Lamborghini actually then clips the Nissan GTR, Arkeys takes the corner normally and actually benefits and gains a couple of positions back just by kind of accepting that overtake from the Lamborghini was going to happen. So yeah, think about the situation in the race and minimise that time loss when you are being overtaken, and it's these little small differences that might make the difference towards the end of a race. So next up, we're looking at a couple of infamous corners. We had turn 6 at Atlanta, we've got turn 1 at Watkins Glen, turn 9 at Red Bull Ring, and we have the bus stop chicane at Daytona. Now the reason we're looking at these corners is because every track out there pretty much has one of those corners where it is very, very easy to pick up a track limits penalty. So tip number 2, and this one might seem obvious, is to avoid getting those track limit penalties at those notorious corners. If you go into the race with the mindset and focus of avoiding getting those track limits penalties, then you can take advantage of other drivers not having that same mentality, that same focus, and picking up those penalties and take a big advantage of them. And I'll just give you an example here of how a simple track limit penalty can have such a snowball effect on watching somebody's race unravel. So we're on board here with JH24, we're on lap 8 of a 10 lap race around Daytona. He's up in P3, he's got the close attentions of myself and no ordinary taxi behind him, but he gets a sort of track limits penalty there, just a half second coming through the bus stop chicane under no real pressure, to be perfectly honest with you. But the result of that is that he falls behind myself and the Bulgarian driver, and he drops far enough back to kind of start getting the kind of weak part of the slipstream rather than the strong part of the slipstream, and you can just see he's dropping further and further behind, and possibly just through the pressure, maybe trying now to push a little bit too hard, maybe being annoyed with himself, the frustration, he makes this mistake into turn 1 on lap 10, clips the barrier, it puts him round, and by the time he gets the car recovered, he's down in 12th place. And basically the result, or the snowball effect of getting that half second penalty, looking like getting a podium, at worst getting a 5th place, is turned into a P12, and if you're on the kind of quest to improve your DR, then that is going to be catastrophic for your progress. And yeah, just wanted to sort of show the snowball effect of picking up a very innocuous looking penalty, and just how, you know, how wrong the race went after picking up that very innocent, easily avoidable penalty. Another example here, you've got Key 25 also at Daytona. He picks up a 1.5 second penalty on lap 2. Pretty harsh, to be fair. He's up in P2 at the time. He's clearly the quickest driver on this grid. He would win this race no problem whatsoever, but that penalty is going to put him back down into P8 coming into turn 1 here. And the consequences of that penalty meant that Key was to get involved in several other instances over the course of this race, and he was to finish down in P8 in a race that he comfortably could have won had he avoided getting that penalty. So yeah, I think it's a really good tip. It's definitely something you should be focusing on if you're maybe picking up a lot of track limits penalties, that, you know, maybe you just think it's fairly innocuous, you're only going to lose a second when you serve the penalty, but it's actually more the consequences and the snowball effect of that penalty and the situations that may well put you further in the race that has the greater effect on your results. And, you know, if you can cut them out, let the other drivers around you get those penalties, then, you know, you're going to put yourself in the box seats, you're going to gain a big advantage. You're going to start turning results that may have been being P10s into P6s, consistent results, are going to help you improve that driver rating. Next up, we're going to talk about the perils of the pit lane and making pit stops. Now, in very many of the tracks in Gran Turismo 7, making a pit stop is no big deal. You kind of, for example here, we're at Dragon Trail Gardens, you come out the last corner, pit lane's on the left hand side, bring the car over to the left hand side, make sure you don't cross that white line, very strict in Gran Turismo 7, you'll pick up a 3 second penalty for crossing a white line either on the entry or the exit. But once you kind of, you basically drive into the pit lane, you don't have to slow down or anything, it's fairly automated from that point forward. Change your tyres, set your fuel, drive back out, and then make sure you avoid that white line on the exit. For example, leaving here at Dragon Trail Gardens, absolutely nothing too complicated about that whatsoever. But it's not the case at every pit lane. For example, at Bathurst, you've got this tricky little chicane to negotiate as you enter the pits, and if you cut one of the corners here, as one of the fastest drivers in the world has just done, wind 109, you will pick up a 3 second penalty as demonstrated there. You can get it even more wrong than that. Got Max Power coming into the pit lane at Bathurst as well. Cuts the corner but also manages to then drive into the barrier. Manages to get the car into the pits. Very lucky to not get reset to the track, to be honest. But yeah, negotiating the pit lane is just something you want to kind of exhibit quite a lot of care, and it's one of these penalties that is very, very easy to cut out of your racing, and they're so detrimental to your race. A 3 second penalty is going to absolutely murder you. Got an example here of the Swedish driver who makes a late call to go into the pits and cuts across the front of my car and kind of, well, spins himself out. So another thing to be cautious of as well. And here's an example of a driver who's clearly never entered the pit lane at Autopolis International. Thought he could just drive straight in at full bung and go straight into the barrier there. But yeah, in short, do your homework, make sure you know the pit lanes, make sure you know where the white lines are, make sure you know where your braking point is, make sure you understand if you have to kind of do a little bit of braking that you have to drive into that pit lane. It's just a penalty, you need to cut out your race. And I still see, you know, drivers in top split making this mistake. I've seen drivers at the World Tour event, the World Finals event at Monaco, making this mistake on the entry into the high speed ring, and, you know, a 3 second penalty, catastrophic to your race. It's going to really dent your results. And if you're on the quest for DR, this is definitely something you want to be cutting out of your racing. Next up we have learn how to fuel save. So PD do love to throw in a fuel saving race every now and then, either in Daily Race C or in the GTWS events, and in the sort of higher splits then most people are very much switched on to the strategy. The multiplier will be high enough, they'll do their practice, they'll do their homework, and they'll know that the best way to negotiate that race is to save fuel rather than make a pit stop. But a little bit lower down the rankings, you're more likely to find drivers just driving full burn off the fuel, and then have to make that pit stop. So if you're a driver maybe in a B lobby or a C lobby and you're looking to gain some DR, then these races are absolute gold for you, because if you're the one driver who does the right strategy, you can go from any position on the grid and probably pick up a win. So if you can learn to fuel save and do the right strategy in these races, then you are in for a DR haul that you've probably you've never had before for that week. And they're absolute gold for you for improving your DR. Now we're looking at this Renault Megane driver. In this race he was the only driver to do the no stopper, done the fuel saving. He had a spin on lap 6 and he still won by around about 6 seconds. He'd probably won this race by around about 18 seconds if he hadn't had that spin. But every other driver on the grid either pitted on lap 7 or 8, and the driver that we looked at, the Renault Megane driver, they went from the back of the grid up to P1. And an easy victory for them, because they were the only driver who really kind of did the right strategy. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a selfless plug here. If you happen to be looking for strategy advice for a Daily Race C, then do check out the channel every Monday morning. I'll tell you if the race is going to be a no stopper, I'll tell you if it's going to be a one stopper, and there's also videos on the channel that will tell you how to do that all important fuel saving, should it be a fuel saving week. But yeah, if you're looking to boost your DR, these weeks could be golden for you. Learn how to fuel save. Next up we have quitting the race, or as I would advise is you don't ever quit the race, because it might just seem like the only thing to do. You might be toiling down last, it's going completely wrong on turn 1, you've got a 4.5 second penalty like this driver here. But if you're on the quest for DR, absolutely one of the worst things you can do, because you will get an automatic penalty for quitting the race anyway, not only on your driver rating but also on your sportsmanship rating. But I have done far too many races over the years in Gran Turismo Sport and Gran Turismo 7 where always look lost. You look like you're on for an absolutely horrendous result, and then stuff just happens up ahead, and before you know it, you've picked up a P8 when you were looking like getting a P14. So never ever quit the race, you just never know what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, you may well be in last, you might be 30 seconds behind the next car, but 5 drivers ahead of you quit that race, then you gain DR off all those drivers, and coming last, a minute off the leader in P11 is a lot better than quitting the race and coming and getting classified in P16. So if you're looking for DR, quitting the race is definitely a no-no, and you see far too many people quitting races these days anyway. And finally we have pre-race preparation. If like me you often enter a race maybe 7, 8, 10 minutes before it's due to start, then the way you spend that 7 or 8 minutes can be vitally important to getting a good result in the race. Now I think too many people often jump into the time trial section here and then just go into time trial mode and start to try and set the quickest possible lap that they can. Now I'm a great believer in kind of separating qualifying and race pace, you know, so if you want to kind of improve your qualifying time, then actually dedicate, you know, your time to that. But if you're in the kind of pre-race lobby or you're waiting on the countdown down, I much think you're better off kind of racing or sort of practicing in a kind of race mentality. So, you know, dial it back by a couple of percent, go into the, you know, do some practice laps where you're kind of lapping consistently, getting into a flow, learning all the corners on the track instead of restarting and maybe just doing the first 3 corners over and over and over because you keep making a mess of it, you're pushing too hard. Practice some pit stops like I kind of mentioned earlier on, so you know where that white line is, you know how long the pit stop takes, you know where you've got to brake when you exit the pits. For example, exiting the Nürburgring here, you know there's a white line across the track, you know where the white line is and where not to cross, and yeah, all these tiny little, you know, minute details and all that are going to help you get a better result when it gets actually into the race. Tell yourself things like, you know, first lap you're going to have cold tyres when you go into the first corner. And also, this is a big one for me as well, if you happen to be in a Daily Race C, there's 2 different compounds. practice on the harder of the two compounds, because that's going to be much more relevant to how the tyres are going to feel when you go into the race. If it's a fuel saver, practice just driving the car like you're fuel saving. I just think all these little things are going to help you be much better prepared in those 7 or 8 minutes before the race, once the race gets underway, if you're actually driving in a kind of mentality of racing rather than time trialling. So there you have it, folks. That is my 6 tips to you to improve your driver rating, and in not one of them did I tell you to go faster, tell you how to go faster. Instead we kind of looked at the details that maybe some people don't think about, and kind of, you know, how to minimise your overall time loss in certain aspects of the race, whether that's getting overtaken by a faster driver, whether that's being on the right strategy by learning to fuel save, whether that's avoiding the track limits penalties, or whether it's just getting yourself better prepared before the race starts so that you're in the kind of right kind of mode, if you like, rather than, you know, being in a kind of time trialing mode, you're in kind of race mode. And I think if you're maybe struggling to kind of increase your DR, and you may be a B rated driver and you're struggling to get to A, you're a D rated driver and you're struggling to get to C, I think if you start following some of the tips that I've kind of put out to you here, you should see some tangible benefits to your results. And it might be the difference, you know, before, you know, you're picking up a P8, applying some of the tips here might start turning those P8s into P5s, or those P10s into P7s, and, you know, start getting more consistent, decent results. And that's what's essentially going to boost your DR from what it is. But I'm going to pretty much wrap it up there, folks. Let me know what you think in the comments of these tips. If you've maybe watched this video and then a couple of months later started applying them and started getting better results, I'd love to hear from you. That's why we do these videos on the channel at the end of the day. It's to help you drivers out there to start getting some better results. And essentially, you know, this is what I've learned from playing GT Sport and Gran Turismo 7 over the last 4 years. I'm not the quickest driver out there by any means. I'm not the slowest driver either, but I do think sometimes, certainly in Daily Race C or the longer kind of GTWS races, I punch above my weight, mainly because I kind of race quite sensible and apply a lot of the tips and advice that I've given you here to my races. You know, don't pick up these silly penalties, don't get into battles that I know I can't win. And yeah, sometimes, you know, in the long run, as the race unfolds, you start to pick up some really decent results against drivers who are probably faster than you, but maybe not racing quite as smart. But if you've liked the video, please hit that like button, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall catch you on the next one. Goodbye now.